Hello and welcome to this week's episode. We are going to dive into something that affects so many people across this country and really across the world, yet nobody really talks about the why or what you can do to fix it. So this week we are going to dive into cholesterol, and cholesterol is really painted as the enemy. It's often, told that if you have high cholesterol, you are going to end up having a heart attack, heart disease, some sort of cardiovascular issue. You have a whole diet industry that is really founded upon the low cholesterol, cholesterol-free foods. You got a whole type of eating style that was low fat to help lower cholesterol. But the interesting piece of it is much of the information that we know and we've heard for years isn't the full picture, isn't the full accurate story. And now we're starting to get more and more research on what the best tests are for looking at cholesterol and your risk of cardiovascular disease, and then really what the cause of it is, right? So many people are told, well, it runs in your family, so you're going to get it. But now we know, one, that's not true, and two, what are the things that put you at a higher risk for developing high cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. So the first thing I want to look at is, what is cholesterol? Cholesterol is something that we all have to have. It is actually a waxy, fat-like molecule that is essential for human life. Every single cell in our body, the membrane of it, is made of cholesterol. Think of it basically as the walls of your house, right? Every cell is going to have this cell membrane that is going to give it the structure, stability, and also the flexibility. And that's what cholesterol does for our cells. Cholesterol is also the building blocks of all of your hormones. So without cholesterol, you can't make estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol, or even vitamin D. It also helps your liver produce bile acids so that you can digest and absorb fats. It's crucial for brain health. About 25% of your body's cholesterol actually is found in our brain. Our brain is a very fat-heavy organ. And so what most people don't realize is about 75% of your cholesterol does not actually come from food. It actually is made by your liver. So 75% made by the body, 25% is brought in from food. But when your body makes something, especially 75% of it, that is just how crucial cholesterol is to our bodies, to our health. So with something that is so crucial for us, you can't really say that it is bad for us, right? This idea that cholesterol is bad for us is just really not true. It's just one of those lies that's kind of perpetuated over time. We have to have cholesterol. Yes, you want it in some sort of balance, but you have to have cholesterol to survive. So the first myth that we see is kind of piggybacking on that is that cholesterol is bad. And, you hear people talk about the bad cholesterol and I've got high LDL, the bad guy. But the thing about it is, again, kind of not exactly the full picture. You've got people that call LDL cholesterol the bad guy, and you got people that call HDL the good guy. And that's not exactly true. HDL and LDL actually aren't cholesterol. They are lipoproteins. So these are the carriers that transport cholesterol around your body. And so think of it as like a delivery guy, right? So the LDL will carry cholesterol from the liver to your tissues to be used. All the cells need it. And then HDL basically picks up and carries it back to the liver to be recycled. Neither one is really good or bad. They just have different jobs. And the problem isn't LDL itself, it's the type of LDL particles that someone has. So research shows that small, dense LDL particles are more likely to squeeze into blood vessels, into the walls, and become oxidized. This itself triggers inflammation. The large, fluffy LDL particles, they're far less concerning for us than the small, dense ones. But really, we can dive into, and we will, into the types of testing you can do to see what types of particles do you have and the ApoB proteins to see how many how many you have circulating around. So if you just were to look at total LDL, you're really missing part of the picture. A person with a high LDL, but it's bigger LDL particles, not as big of a risk as someone that has a high LDL, but small, dense LDL particles. So the other thing to look at in just a standard cholesterol panel is the ratios. So you can look at total cholesterol to HDL, you can look at total cholesterol to LDL, and then we can look at the triglyceride to HDL ratio. Ideally, we have that number below 2. That would be in the functional range, textbook perfect. And that would be associated with good insulin sensitivity and a lower cardiovascular risk. Ratios over 4 would indicate possible insulin resistance and higher cardiovascular risk. So instead of really demonizing cholesterol, what we need to do is ask, what type of cholesterol particles do I have? Are they small? Are they big? What is my HDL, LDL? What are the ratios? And then again, we're going to dive into deeper testing that really gives you the full picture of what your cholesterol panel looks like. The next thing people always associate is that if you have high cholesterol, that automatically correlates to heart attack. And yes, there is a correlation, but it doesn't mean that if you have high cholesterol, you are going to have a heart attack. There is a very big study, the Framingham Heart Study, that showed that half of the people that were hospitalized for heart disease had cholesterol levels considered normal, but they had other risk factors. They had high inflammation, they had diabetes, they were smokers, which really showed that having high cholesterol does not directly correlate to having cardiovascular disease. So if cholesterol alone doesn't really predict heart disease, then what does? And so the big things, and probably the biggest thing, is inflammation. Inflammation, then oxidative stress or cellular stress, blood sugar imbalances, chronic stress, smoking, all of that are just as important to really look at someone's risk for cardiovascular disease. So how does inflammation or oxidative stress link to heart disease? So the lining of our blood vessels, the endothelium, when it gets injured, what happens is the body will send cholesterol to basically patch up the damage. So it's almost like you're repairing a pothole. So the cholesterol gets put there to repair the damage, and then it's going to keep basically the vessel wall from damaging itself more. So the more damage it's done, the more cholesterol that gets deposited trying to fix the problem. Over time, that can become problematic. That becomes plaque buildup. But the reason it's there isn't because your cholesterol was high. It was because there was damage to the blood vessels, often inflammation being a big culprit, that the body had to send cholesterol to patch up the damage. The next myth we hear all the time, especially someone that is dealing with high cholesterol, they're often told, well, you need to stop eating foods that are high in cholesterol. This has been going on for years and years and years. And for many years, eggs were villainized, right? They do contain cholesterol. And so the assumption was simple that if you ate cholesterol, your cholesterol went higher. But study after study after study shows that for most people, dietary cholesterol has very little impact on blood cholesterol. A 2015 meta-analysis in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that egg consumption wasn't associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease or stroke. The real dietary villains are going to be all the inflammatory foods, right? Refined carbs, trans fats, processed seed oils, all of that. Those can raise triglycerides, lower HDL, and drive inflammation. And that is what damages arteries, not eating eggs. Then we get into the myth that I think is probably the most polarizing for a lot of people. It's that statins are the only answer. And so statins are some of the most powerful drugs in the world. And yes, they do lower LDL cholesterol, especially for men with existing heart disease. They can reduce the risk. But one, they don't really figure out why you have high cholesterol in the first place. They completely ignore that whole piece of the puzzle. And they do have significant side effects that are associated with them. They do block the body's ability to make mevalonate, which is a precursor not only for cholesterol, but also is for CoQ10. CoQ10 is a essential vitamin for our mitochondria, and the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells. They make all of our cellular energy for our cells to do all of their jobs. So when you don't have CoQ10, the mitochondrial function decreases, our energy production decreases, and when this happens, we experience fatigue, cognitive changes, muscle aches, all of that. Your mitochondria really have to be functioning well for us to function well as a whole. There are some less common side effects that can occur, but liver damage is a big one. Increased blood sugar is a big one. And we're going to get to root causes of high cholesterol, and blood sugar imbalance is a big piece of that. So if you're someone that the reason that cholesterol is a little off is maybe blood sugar imbalances, and then you get on a statin, and that can perpetuate the whole cycle even more. Some people experience neurological issues. This can be brain fog, memory issues, or even neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy, or nerves in your arms and your legs. So it's, yes, statins can do the job and they can lower it, and for some people is absolutely necessary. However, the big piece of the puzzle that's missing is, why did this happen in the first place, and what can I do in my day-to-day life that's going to help balance my cholesterol and get it back in balance? My favorite myth, and this really goes with diabetes, heart disease, many of the chronic conditions, is it runs in my family, so I'm gonna get it piece. We hear this all the time. I hear this from friends, I hear this from family, but then we also hear it with a lot of clients, is they just kind of accept something because their mom and dad had it or their grandparents had it. And yes, genetics do play a piece of this. That is not the full picture at all. So there are genetics that are at play. However, they're not super common. The genetics that do set people up for high cholesterol, it's not the most common gene. It's estimated that about 1 in 250 people carry these genes. So not the most common thing. Most of the time when someone says it runs in my family, what they're really talking about is all of the lifestyle things that you grew up with and that have really carried into your adulthood that sets you up for chronic conditions. That's how you eat. That's the water that you drink. And do you drink alcohol? What is your stress like? What is your relationships like? What is your environment like? That is the most important piece of the puzzle. Your family, you often eat the same foods, especially when you're growing up, you eat the same foods, and often those carry into adulthood. You'll cook your mom's X recipe because you love it, or grandma's this and that. And often we basically perpetuate how we were raised into our adulthood and raise our kids that way. So often we're bringing in the same lifestyle factors that we had growing up. Something that's not talked about is epigenetics. And so epigenetics basically tells us that you have your genes. Those are never going to change, right? What you are born with genetically, you are always going to have. However, genes can be expressed, meaning they can be turned on and turned off. So you could have every gene. You could have a cancer gene, Alzheimer's, blood sugar imbalances and diabetes genes, high cholesterol. You could have all of that and never develop a single one of those pathologies because the gene could never be expressed or never be turned on. And so we know that the majority of the weight of the gene is actually our lifestyle. And so you can't change that the gene is there. That is a small percentage of the puzzle that you cannot change. However, the far greater weight is your stress, your foods, your toxic load, your sleep, your relationships. All of that is far more important in terms of how the genes are expressed over the gene itself. So getting caught up in, I have the insert gene here, really, there's nothing you can do about that. But what you can control is all of the lifestyle factors. I have a friend and he always says, disease doesn't run in your family. No one runs in your family. And he says that a little facetiously, but really what he's talking about is that the disease itself isn't guaranteed if everyone in your family has it. It's what your lifestyle is. And so this is why it is so important, because that's what you can control. When people get very fixated on the genes that they have, it's very unfortunate because you can't change that, but you can control and change what you eat, what you watch, your relationships, your stress, your sleep. All of that is controllable and far more important to, is that gene going to be turned on or off? So what is the functional approach to cholesterol? So most doctors are just running a lipid panel, right? They're looking at cholesterol, total cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL, HDL. That is it. And yes, that is a piece of the puzzle, but in terms of cholesterol, you can run far more comprehensive panels to get a better idea of what exactly is the full picture. So one marker that I love to run is ApoB. ApoB actually measures the actual number of cholesterol particles. Research has shown that ApoB is a stronger predictor of cardiovascular events than LDL cholesterol. Then you can look at LDL particle size and number. So instead of just looking at total LDL, you're looking at how big it is and how many of them are floating around. This is going to be way more beneficial than just looking at LDL because, again, you can see, are they small and dense, which have a more likelihood to wedge into blood vessel walls, or are they larger and fluffier? And then again, how many of them are there floating around? Then we have lipoprotein A, and this is a genetic marker that, if it's there, can increase your risk. Most people are never tested for it. And again, just because you have a genetic marker does not mean it's going to be an issue. But if you have genes that predispose you, you can really dive in and make sure that your lifestyle is dialed in and good. And then we have high sensitivity CRP. C-reactive protein is a marker of inflammation, and it's going to correlate with heart attack risk, really independent of cholesterol. It really just looks at inflammation. What is your inflammation level like? And you want the high sensitivity one. Ideally, you want that below 1. Anything below 1 is good. Higher is really, the higher the number, the higher the risk for you. So that in itself, I would say, is a more comprehensive cholesterol panel that should be run every year in your physical, and you can ask for those markers. And then if you're someone that comes back high, what could have caused it, right? We don't just think that the body goes, I'm going to elevate cholesterol because why not, right? There's always a reason. There's always something that caused it. So these are some of the most common root causes that if someone comes to us with high cholesterol, they're eating well, that we dive into and go, okay, let's explore all of these options and see where the problem lies. So the first is blood sugar imbalances and insulin resistance. This is really the foundation of health. Your blood sugar has to be in balance for you to really be healthy and be optimized. So this is probably the first question we ask if someone is struggling with high cholesterol. What does your blood sugar look like? People often do think that because they eat well, that there's no way they have blood sugar issues. And often that's not necessarily true. We know things like chronic stress and even certain toxins can cause blood sugar imbalances and insulin resistance aside from what they're eating. So what does their blood sugar look like? So when we eat foods that break down to glucose, basically the pancreas releases insulin. Insulin helps get glucose into the cell to be used as a fuel source. And what it does is when we get imbalanced, blood sugar is chronically high, you produce more and more, or release more and more insulin to bring down your glucose or bring down your blood sugar levels. And after a while, you lose sensitivity to insulin being pumped out. And so we get to where we have insulin resistance, and ultimately that can lead to type 2 diabetes down the road. So when your blood sugar is chronically high, we produce more insulin, but that also tells the liver to make more triglycerides and more small dense LDL particles. So having high blood sugar, having insulin resistance can put you more at risk to cardiovascular risk and disease. Insulin resistance itself is a very inflammatory process, and you'll start to see other things starting to go sideways when you're in an insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes state. We start to see other things, hormones and liver and all sorts of other things go a little haywire, but it's very inflammatory. And so again, when you get into this inflammatory cycle, it can really set you up for having high cholesterol. One of the easiest ways to see how your blood sugar looks is getting a CGM. You may have seen people walking around with those things on the back of their arms. A CGM is something you wear for 2 weeks to a month that gives you an idea of how your blood sugar is 24/7, right? You can see, is it too high after I eat? Is it crashing down? You can see really what your blood sugar is doing over a 24-hour window. And so that is a great way to see, is blood sugar an issue for me? The other thing is getting your fasting insulin tested. You want to check for insulin resistance. You can check fasting insulin, and if it's elevated, is showing that you are either kind of on your way to insulin resistance or already there and need to do a deep dive into what foods you're eating, your stress, your sleep, your toxins to get your blood sugar balanced. The next thing we like to look at after looking at blood sugar and getting that balanced is what is someone's thyroid function? The thyroid hormones do actually regulate lipid metabolism or cholesterol metabolism. So they're going to help clear out cholesterol from the bloodstream. So low thyroid function, even if it's very, very mild, can cause LDL and total cholesterol to rise because nobody's clearing it. So sometimes we see high cholesterol as actually undiagnosed underactive thyroid or some sort of thyroid imbalance, not necessarily a cholesterol problem at all. The problem with the thyroid is that many doctors only will run TSH. They will only look at TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone. They don't look at all of the hormones that are actually in the pathway. They don't look at T4, T3, free T4, free T3, reverse T3. There's so many other hormones that actually show you the full picture. Are these hormones converting? Where is the problem? And so getting your doctor to run a full thyroid panel is crucial, not just TSH, so that you can see, is there a problem? Because often TSH will look okay, but it's the rest of the hormones that'll be a little bit off. And then also the thyroid panel, the TSH in particular, has a huge range in the standard allopathic range. And so ideally, functionally, you want to be between 1 and 3 on TSH. So really looking at that, you can get an idea, but often TSH looks fine. It's the guys lower in the chain that are a little bit off that can start to slowly raise cholesterol levels. The biggest thing with inflammation, though, is figuring out where is it coming from. I actually have an entire other podcast on this, on drivers of inflammation. So really, it's not just like you can turn it off that way. You really have to figure out what is the culprit. Is it your gut? Is it your foods? Is it your stress? Is it toxins? Is it infections? There's a million culprits of it, but inflammation is a massive driver of elevated cholesterol. The next piece, and you had to know this is coming from me, is toxins. Toxins are a huge driver of elevated cholesterol. So when we look at toxins, whether we're talking about mold, heavy metals, environmental toxins, they do put extra burden on the liver. The liver is responsible for breaking down toxins and getting them out of the body. So if someone has a very high toxic load, it is going to stress out the liver. The liver is the same organ that processes cholesterol. So if your liver is already massively stressed out by a toxin, which is a threat to the body, often we're going to see cholesterol go a little haywire. So we look at mold mycotoxins, heavy metals, things like mercury, lead, environmental toxins. They also create oxidative stress. They're massively inflammatory. So again, causing inflammation of the arteries, possible damage to them. And they do keep the immune system quite alert, on high alert. And so we see this often, that the body will raise cholesterol due to what these toxins do to the body from the stress. Something we also see is often during detox, we often see that cholesterol may even pop up a little bit. Again, these things are hard to get out. They do stress the liver. So often someone will detox and their cholesterol will come up a little bit. And then once they've cleared these toxins out of their system, then it drops right back down. The next thing we like to look at is methylation mutations. So methylation is a biochemical process that basically helps take an inactive form of a B vitamin, folate, or cobalamin, B9, B12, and turn it to the active form. And that's going to be the methylated forms like methylfolate, methylcobalamin. And this is going to help regulate. Pretty much every system in the body relies on methylation or methylated Bs, but it's going to help regulate homocysteine. It's going to help detox. It's going to help your liver. It's going to help your neurotransmitters. Methylation is crucial, but a large chunk of the population actually can't methylate well at all, meaning they can't take a raw form of those B vitamins and convert it to the methylated form. And so there's a genetic mutation called MTHFR that many people have that will impair methylation. So when you have this methylation mutation, you're going to see your homocysteine go up. And homocysteine, again, is another marker that they like to look at for cardiovascular inflammation. But people with these methylation mutations have to take a methylated form of B9 and B12, methylfolate and methylcobalamin. And so when they take that methylated form, now their body can use the methylated Bs. When they don't, when they take a normal B12, their body doesn't use it. And so you don't have the Bs needed. Bs are needed for the liver detox, for your liver to do all of its phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. It's needed to make your hormones. It's needed to keep your immune system. The Bs are essential. And so the loophole to this is just take methylated Bs. And you'll see it'll say methyl in front of it. The other forms, are probably the most common form that is not methylated is cyano. So you'll see like cyanocobalamin. But again, you just want methyl, and you can very easily check to see if you have methylation mutations. But again, the loophole is just to take methylated B vitamins. So when we are looking at trying to balance cholesterol, what are the practical things that we can do? So the most important thing, and I really think this stems into really any area of health, is balancing your blood sugar. Insulin resistance is one of the biggest hidden drivers of heart disease. High insulin really can damage the endothelium. It raises triglycerides. It creates small, dense LDL. So having balanced blood sugar is crucial. And so again, many people, even healthy people, will argue with me that their blood sugar is perfect. There's no issue there. And then when we do a deeper dive, we look at fasting insulin, we look at a CGM, we often find that's not exactly true. And it doesn't mean that you're eating the wrong foods. Sometimes it does, but often it can be stress, it can be poor sleep, it can be toxins that can lead to insulin resistance. So balancing blood sugar is absolutely crucial. So start there. The next is eating an anti-inflammatory diet. So really, this is again kind of hand in hand with blood sugar. Your diet has to be clean. It has to be free of processed foods, refined sugar, has to be free of or lower in seed oils. We really have to eat a clean diet. Protein, fats, fruits, vegetables, drink water. And it's not I'm going to eat that way 5 days a week and then I'm going to binge over the weekend. This is truly a lifestyle. Yes, you can have flexibility, things here and there, but 80% of the time, your diet needs to be clean. And it doesn't mean it's boring. It can be an amazing diet, but it is an anti-inflammatory diet, pulling out the foods that are linked to inflammation. Seems very simple, but moving is crucial, making sure that you're getting exercise, but both strength training and cardio. Strength training helps improve your insulin sensitivity. It's crucial for actual storage of excess blood sugar in the form of glycogen. Having muscle is crucial for us. But again, we also need to do cardio, but it can just be things like walking. It doesn't mean go run 5 miles. It can just be moving. But exercise will help increase HDL, it will lower triglycerides, crucial for overall cardiovascular health. This one no one likes to hear, but reducing stress. We all know stress is a big killer. Stress is the new smoking. Stress is very, very hard on our body. We are never designed to be stuck in a state of chronic stress, and many of us are. Many of us live high stress lives with work and family and finances and kids and all of the things. And so when we are really stressed, we know that it can disrupt lipid metabolism. We know it's huge for blood sugar regulation. And so getting your stress back in balance is key. I know no one's stress is going to go to zero. That's just not realistic. However, there's tools that we can do to help manage our stress and get it where the body is able to get out of fight or flight and back into a state of calm so that you're not just stuck in fight or flight and producing and dumping cortisol. And then the big piece is do further testing, right? Don't just settle for a standard cholesterol or lipid panel. You want to run all of those markers that we talked about. And then if those guys are off and you don't know why, then do deeper testing. Figure out what is the culprit. Do you have inflammatories in your system? Is it blood sugar? Is it toxins, mold, heavy metals, something like that? Look deeper under the hood. And then from there, you can come up with a game plan of what needs to be adjusted and then start to rebalance that and watch your cholesterol improve. So really, cholesterol is not the enemy. It is the messenger. High cholesterol doesn't mean that you're going to get cardiovascular disease. It's really just telling us that, hey, there's something wrong. We need to figure out what it is. What can we do to support the body to allow this to go back to a normal state? So it's really something that is able to be managed. You just have to figure out the why. And figuring out the why can sometimes be difficult, but there now with how much testing we have, we can often find it. And then once you figure out the why and balance that, then it's amazing. The body gets back to a state of balance, cholesterol is stable, and you don't have to worry so much. So I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much.